Welcome back to the Hot Dish. We are blessed today to have a governor who is not only our neighboring governor, but one of our dear friends. Thanks so much, Governor, for joining us on the Hot Dish.
Thanks, Heidi. And a Hot Dish champion, I might add, from Congress. So, three-time champion.
I think Amy might not agree with that.
I know. She's, I believe, a one-time champion. I believe I had a three-peat in there at one point with my Spam hot dish. So that was a winner.
Obviously, neither one of you have ever eaten my deer sausage. I can put that in the hot dish, too, just for the record.
Well, I would eat that. You know, the year both of us got beat, there was a lot of controversy because Colin Peterson won it with a bear hot dish. The bear was not the controversy. He got it in Wisconsin. That was the controversy. And Colin is a cook, too. So, it's good to see you both.
It's good to see you.
Just for a little background, folks, Governor Walz born in rural country, which is why we love him so much on the Hot Dish. He was in the House of Representatives from 2007 to 2019. I don't even need to tell you about this man. Served on the ticket. Was a huge part of really what made us so proud here in the Midwest. And not to mention the fact that this guy drives an international Scout. So that's enough for me right there. Governor, you decided to run again. Tell people why.
Yeah, I did. And again, it's great to be with both of you. Look, I think I keep saying this where everybody says these are unprecedented times. I want to live in precedented times. But I still think that time in Congress, especially, and I would argue here in Minnesota, I had the most closely divided legislature in the country last year, and we passed a budget, cut spending, we're able to cut some taxes, still invested in education, healthcare, balance the budget. I believe that government is a force of good, but I also believe that compromise is somewhat at the key of this. Now, I'm not going to compromise on people's human rights, but I'll certainly compromise on policies that make a difference. And I think right now, with what we're seeing out of D.C., what we're seeing out of decisions being made going over the Congress, things that were appropriated, both of you are experienced in this. Heidi, you worked on it when we craft a farm bill and have the nutrition title in there. We're not pretending when we put money into SNAP, and the president doesn't get to just hold that up. I think here in Minnesota, we're seeing progress on a lot of fronts. And I think I've got the experience to get us through one more term. So I've asked the people to give me another opportunity.
Well, you're running at a time when the farm economy is looking a little bleaker than it did 4 years ago, Tim.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you're watching that. I'm sure you're thinking about all the soybean farmers and the corn farmers and the folks who raise livestock in Minnesota. How when you talk to your colleagues, other governors, how do you kind of talk about what's happening with the economy in rural America?
Yeah. And again, talking to both of you, it's why I really enjoy this. I had the privilege, Heidi, of being on a conference committee for a farm bill. I think the last one we enacted because they can't get one done where you were a leader on that. And it was so encouraging to bring these voices. And that sitting on those conference committees for a farm bill until what we're dealing with right now, that was super bipartisan, really, really good to work on, and always trying to make sure that we were strengthening the rural economy. It's a mess right now, and it's an unnecessary, it's a man-made mess. Farming's hard enough; it's very unpredictable, weather, everything else. But creating the situation we had right now, I can't express to people who aren't out here to realize how precarious this situation is. I know people compare it back to the 80s. I think it's probably a pretty fair comparison. Land values haven't bottomed out like they did in the 80s, but that feels to me to be a bit of a bubble too, where people are at. People are over leveraged. And this trade war that shifted markets. And I think it's really important to understand farmers work really hard with their checkoffs, with their organizations, to open these markets, to make sure we have these stable markets. And in Minnesota, North Dakota, America in general was viewed as a good trading partner. That's not true anymore. If people think they're going to take the tariffs off, even if we get a deal with China, they've recalibrated their purchasing to South America, and that is not coming back. And so you have loss of markets, you have increased production costs because now Brazil went from 80 million acres to 110 million acres. They need more inputs, they need more tractors, they need more parts. So our folks are dealing with supply chain issues around parts, supply chain issues around inputs, costs increasing on inputs, commodity prices going down, markets being decimated. And then add on top of that, their local hospitals under threat because that's going to close. They're not seeing the funding for their local schools. So rural America right now is as precarious as I've seen it, and almost entirely by choice of this administration, not by the work that's been done there, not by the opportunities that still lie in rural America, whether it's sustainable aviation fuel up in your part of the woods where we're working on, or just new opportunities. So I think it's tough. And when I talk to other governors, I'll just tell with both of you, I've told folks in rural that I'm really worried about this because this is an attitude that I think is increasing, and I think it's dangerous in our polarization of people saying, well, North Dakota voted Republican. Let them live on that. That's fine. Let them figure out what happened here. That's a terrible thing. It's terrible to our neighbors. It's terrible for our overall economy. It's terrible if you eat or need power. But this idea of being, well, there's not much we can do about rural America. They voted Republican.
It's not particularly good politics either.
It's terrible. It's terrible. And look, do I think that you should shame people for that? No, but I think it's okay to understand is you were lied to. You can tell people that you were lied to. This guy did a bait and switch on you. He got his tax cuts for his wealthy, and he left farm economies, stuck. I tell them too is that, look, we're going to need some of this help they're promising as a bridge loan. Farmers don't want to bail out. They don't want this. That is absolutely, you guys know this better than anybody, but they need this money now. They need it because it's the foundational, because I'll tell you what we're going to end up doing here. We're going to end up forcing these folks out of business, and it's going to be bought up by those predators that swoop in and buy it up. And then we get the consolidation that all of us complain about. So it's a tough one.
The one thing that I would add in all of this is there's a situation. You made reference to the 80s. Okay, so let me just say this. The biggest thing that's happening now to farmers versus the 80s, where there's foreclosure and everything that went with it, is they're just not getting their operating loans. The banks are sitting there saying the numbers don't work out. We're not giving you the operating loans. Now, there's ranchers in Minnesota, just like there's ranchers all over the areas in the rural areas that are listening to us. So, when a president is on Air Force One and he walks back and he leans into a microphone and says, we're going to buy Argentinian beef right after we gave them $40 billion. And the next day, our boys are trying to sell their feeders at market, and they lost $300 a head, Governor. $300 a head. I mean,
and that was the one bright spot, Joel.
Get it.
Cattle was the one bright spot there for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else is, sugar beets are down. Everything's down. But cattle was okay, and then this comes. You're exactly right. And when we talked to him, I said, my responsibility as governor is making sure that we're supporting those rural communities. We're doing the things necessary. We keep folks on the land, because I'll tell you, it may be 1% of the population that's directly involved with agriculture, but every one of our communities is seeing the ripple effect through the economy. Mm-hmm. And look, pile on losing the markets on SNAP, which we know is a market for our products. It's a mess. I do worry about that, Joel. And I don't know if because the land values are still high, if that helps get us out of this. But you're right, with no operating loans, people are already thinking next year's planting season. We just finished up harvest this year. There is so much uncertainty right now. And especially when you get an average age of 56, 57, some of these folks are saying, is it worth it anymore? Is it worth it to keep doing this?
And they don't have a son or daughter who wants to farm. And so they're like, why am I struggling? Why am I risking the legacy of or my assets to keep doing this when they don't see any light at the end of the tunnel? The one thing I want to impress upon people, we talk a lot about food deserts or grocery deserts in rural America. When you and I were debating that farm bill, and it was a lot of discussion about SNAP, some of the best proponents of keeping the SNAP benefits were those rural grocery stores.
100%.
Because they knew how much of their income, how much of those purchases came from people who were on food assistance.
100%. I remember this, and I actually expanded it. We were talking about some of these, kind of the modern version of the convenience store or whatever. Many of these things, like Quick Trips in my neck of the woods, those are the local grocery store too, of being access to get food, to get, fresh milk, fresh foods, things like that. But it is it is a precarious situation in states like Minnesota and North Dakota in the Midwest. Agriculture is still a really big part of our economy. It is going to have immense consequences for this country. And so I'm deeply concerned that people think that there's a quick fix here. I think that, if Donald Trump thinks he's going to pressure somebody, he's going to win a trade war. This truce we have with China is just simply a truce. The tariffs are still on, and China's not coming back to our soybean producers. I'm really worried. That's why we're looking at domestic markets. It's why I'm pushing, sustainable aviation fuel, other markets, because we're going to have to think about that.
They did that during the first administration. We never got back the share of the market that we had before Donald Trump was president. We lost a big part of that share. I think farmers are starting to understand that. But I want to tell you about a guy that called into my show, you two, from Manitoba. Okay. He calls into my show. He listens to the show along with a bunch of people in Canada. And he said, Joel, the problem we have is we're being treated poorly, that we don't feel welcome. And then we ended up talking, guys, about Jack Daniels. That's what we talked about. And he said, I can't find it on my shelf. It'd be like gold to me. I like a good bottle of a Jack Daniels, a good glass of it. And he said, we don't have it up here. They're not going to put it on the shelf. In fact, the people up here don't stock a lot of American products anymore. And I said to him, well, you come on down to my place, I'll get you one. And he goes, I don't feel welcome there. I'm not coming down that too until I feel welcome there.
I put out ads out of our Explore Minnesota and said, be welcome. You're always welcome here. And, Thunder Bay is right across the border up there from Grand Portage. We get a lot of people come over. They're our closest friends. We're mostly Canadian, if you will, in how Minnesotans act. And I did that same thing, and I put that out, and I got pushback from people and said, look, we trust you guys. We trust you, Governor. We trust Minnesota, but you don't run the border. You don't do the border. You're not these agents that are up here. And I think you hit on something, Joel. These trade deals are not as impersonal as you think they are. A lot of this is about relationships on a broader scale, cultural relationships. And the sense of Canada being so dependable and being there, everything's a shakedown operation. Everything's at NATO. Everything's a shakedown operation. You got to pay more. You got to do this. Should the allies maybe have been putting more of their GDP towards defense? Sure. But there's ways to go about that rather than siding with Putin or making the case that, Ukraine should give up land to an aggression against them when we're all of our allies are right in that same boat. So I got to tell you, in the midst of all this, politics aside, and I get it, what people are saying, the Democrats are doing this. The Democrats are focused on making life more affordable. And Mike Johnson's saying, we're going to keep the government shut down and not pay food stamps because you're asking us to help with health care. Yes, because Medicaid is critically important because the subsidies in the ACA have brought down healthcare costs. And asking Congress to follow through with what they appropriated rather than letting this president step over. Heidi, I would say this. People keep asking me, what are the Democrats going to do about this? I think the real question here is, what are true conservatives and members of the Senate going to do? You've got two senators, and South Dakota's got two senators that I have to, in my heart, believe they do not agree with this. They do not agree with the direction, especially on this issue around tariffs, trade, and farm opportunities. When are they going to speak up? When are they going to say something?
Well, they had a chance, Tim, to vote against the kind of emergency designation, and it didn't vote against it, didn't vote with 4 other Republicans who took a stand on trade, and then turned around and said, but we really want to make amends and we need to do better with our neighbors. In the meantime, North Dakota, I think tourism, we think, is about our 3rd largest industry. It's down 18%. We've been hit almost as hard as Florida with Canadian tourism.
Yeah. Our states are really popular with them. We're experiencing the same thing, and folks coming in to shop, spend money. And this stuff is this can be generational. Joel, you said that. I had the opportunity. I was up for a couple days for the first time I'd ever been there, up in New Brunswick, crossed over from Maine and went into a grocery store to buy some, burgers and stuff we're going to grill out. Canadian flags everywhere, which is fine. They had one aisle where they had shifted all the American products to the last aisle in the grocery store, and everything else in that grocery store was Canadian and was highlighted on that. And so if you wanted Heinz ketchup or whatever, that was on the very last aisle, and there would nobody shop in that aisle. And this is just ridiculous. They're our closest trading partner. Then you can go south of the border to Mexico, the same thing. And then say what you will about this, the Chinese are a major market for us. You got 1 billion people there that would like to buy well-made American goods manufactured by our people. Can't do it. And now you got a massive trade deficit. You got a massive deficit in agriculture. You've lost trust in the markets. And you tell me what the plan is, because I'll tell you what the plan is not. That other countries will pay the tariffs and America will get rich. That is fairy dust talk. That is no one in the world other than Donald Trump believe that's true. No one.
Yeah. Governor, I want to hit upon this because you hunt, I hunt, hunting is in, Heidi's husband hunts a lot.
Do you see my pheasant shot I
here's
posted
something
online?
I want to hit upon and get your take on. Well, I'm not going to say Heidi because I've seen her shoot. There's nothing safer than a pheasant in front of Heidi Heitkamp. But that being said, my point
They're
is
pretty
this.
birds. Why would you want to kill them?
Yeah, to eat them. So here's the other part that I'm going to put out there. We as Democrats, I think have terrible messaging when it comes to guns and gun safety. I think there's things we can do. We can talk about clip size. We can talk about binary triggers. We can talk about, knowledge of who buys what, all of those things. We can have many day waiting period. I'm okay with all of that. But as Democrats, we don't dig into really just the structure of guns. And I think that hurts us in the rural area, Governor.
Yeah, I think so. I think the one thing, Joel, I would say is that I've found that, responsible gun owners are more than willing to make things necessary changes. And look, this is very personal over here. I had my best friend shot and killed, our Speaker of the House. I had 2 little 4th graders shot as they sat in the first day of school in their church. That there are responsible things we can do. And you're right. I mean, locking these things up. Who does not put a trigger lock or put their guns in a safe is beyond me. You're asking for, we had a little one shot here this week. Same thing. 18 guns or something in the house, unlocked. That's going to happen. But I do think you talk to people, talk with them with respect. But I think we also are afraid to talk about some of these common sense things. I will tell you one thing. In 2023, we passed the extreme risk protection, the red flag laws. We got the first data on that. We saved lives. Like, we're able to show the number of times that you go in, you step in. Most people, if you're going to die by a gun, it's going to be by suicide, and you're going to be in rural Minnesota. That's just factual because of the data that we see. We're saving lives in that. I think most responsible gun owners are saying, look, you can protect my Second Amendment rights. You know something about firearms. We know that there's ways to keep them safe, and don't allow them to pigeonhole us into this thing. I'm not interested in taking your guns. I am interested in people who should not have them, not getting them. I am interested in making sure you can't shoot 116 rounds in 62 seconds into little bodies sitting in church. I will say that. But I think most people are like, yeah, I'm with you on that. So I agree, Joel, and not get sucked into the whole thing about this cancel culture and the social issues or whatever of accusing Democrats of being there. That's the only place Republicans go right now, because they don't want to talk about the price of eggs. They don't want to talk about what's happening with soybeans. They don't want to talk about what's happening with rural Medicaid and rural hospitals. They want to talk about transgender swimmers or something. And I think for us, we're not going to throw anybody under the bus, but if there's a lesson here, focus on making life more affordable, focusing on allowing people the freedom to live the lives they want to. If that's in rural Western North Dakota, then help them live that lifestyle that way. Give control locally. The thing I'll go to my grave not understanding is the party that prided itself on states' rights and local control has totally thrown every bit of that out the window. Yeah. They want to step on us. The president threatened to cut all funding to New York City because New Yorkers elect someone. Can you imagine? Can you imagine us saying, if you don't vote for Kamala Harris, North Dakota's not going to get any money? That is just outrageous. That none of this makes any sense. That's what this guy's doing.
Tim, the one message point that I think we've missed out on is, remember it was Bill Clinton, the era of big government is over. Guess what? The era of big government's back. Government taking over corporate America, government taking over universities, government taking over media. I mean, what isn't he trying to control right now from the White House?
The U.S. government owns stake in many companies now, like U.S. Steel. You know what you call that when the government owns businesses? That's communism. And and the idea of this, I'm out there arguing, and look, Joel, I got hit from some of my supporters on the left because, look, I'm a supporter of capitalism, moral capitalism, and free markets. The president is not. He is manipulating markets. He is threatening individual businesses. He's buying individual businesses, and he's putting his supporters in a place. If you build a ballroom, is it just a coincidence that the people who funded that also have $276 billion of contracts? Can you imagine me saying in Minnesota, hey, if you build me a bowling alley in my house, I'll give you the contract on this building? My God. I mean, people should lose their minds and you'd go to prison. That is happening in front of us. So here's what I want to say. Could Democrats do better at messaging? God, yes, we're terrible at it many times. But our focus on improving life, of allowing everybody the opportunity to succeed, of making those investments in things that lead to that seems to me to be a hell of a lot better than if you're connected to the president, you'll do well, and to hell with the rest of you. We're going to hold a party while SNAP benefits expire. That, I got to tell you, old school conservatives, I need them to rise up. That's what I'm saying. The Democrats can do better, but there has got to be frustrated conservatives that are saying, look, we can do better.
Yeah, I would add this, right down to X's and O's, small, it goes back to this. I will guarantee you that whoever was running that excavator that tore down the east wing of the White House did not go to the bar and brag about it afterwards. He didn't. Yeah. But his boss said, you got to do it because Donald Trump wants you to do it. And he lied about doing it. And you know what? America doesn't like it. You saw the poll numbers over the weekend, both of you. And Heidi, you and I were talking about them. And to some degree, there's some hope out there that America is starting to say enough of this bullshit, Heidi.
Yeah, well, when you look at it and you say, where is the line? I mean, and back to your point, Tim, where is the line with conservatives? And people say, oh, well, Donald Trump. I said, quit focusing on Donald Trump. He is who he is. We know who he is. But how come people are enabling it? How come people you and I know, people that you knew in the House, people I knew in the Senate, who would never have tolerated this, even from George W. Bush? They just sit and cower in the corner.
Yes, people who are in this administration that I considered friends who talk more libertarian, because there's nothing libertarian about this group right now. Like Joel, it's gun thing again. This is an argument that's made. Look, guys like, I've heard this to me, guys like Walz think guns are about hunting and personal safety alone. It's about tyranny of the federal government. Where are those dudes? Where are the don't tread on me guys when the federal government is overstepping state control? And I'll tell you both this, when the Biden, and Heidi, you were there too, the Biden administration stepped in and without consulting the states against law in the NDAA, Council of Governors, which I was a co-chair of for many years. Donald Trump appointed me. When the Biden administration overstepped that and took the Space Force, was going to take the Space Force out of the National Guard, I organized a letter and all 50 governors signed it and sent it to Joe Biden and say, you must consult with us. National Guard is under the control of the governors in Title 32. It's under your control in Title 10. You need to consult with us. And everything there, and the Biden administration backed off. Well, when Trump did this in California and in Chicago, it's the same argument. I sent the exact same letter and just changed the name basically from Joe Biden to Donald Trump. Not a single Republican would sign on to it. Yeah. Not a single one. When it was a states' rights issue, every Democrat stood onto it and stood up to Joe Biden. And that we loved Joe Biden, thought his policies were good, but not all of them. And when they weren't good, we were there. This group is so fearful. They know, and behind closed doors, they will say, well, this isn't right. The governors are in charge of the National Guard, and they won't stand up. So somehow Democrats have to figure out our message. Joel, I think you're right. I think the symbolism, like they got all riled up when they changed the Cracker Barrel logo, but apparently it's okay to tear down the East Wing, I think that contradiction is coming home to roost.
The other thing, and this goes directly to a governor that wasn't good at her job down in South Dakota, but Kristi Noem, America is getting it when you see individuals drugged by their hair out of vehicles that were smashed by individuals that are masked, in many cases without any identification on them. United States citizens held while Noem runs around saying that they weren't held. But here's the thing. They have been held, and these people are beaten. they're beaten in the streets, and Americans are running up with their cell phones. They're taking videos of this. They're pointing out what's happening, and that is going viral.
Yes.
And I love it. I love the fact that America is seeing how vicious these people are. I love the fact that America is finding out exactly what ICE is doing. And I'll tell you what, you do that stuff in my hometown, I don't care whether you're a Democrat or Republican, there's going to be a fight, Governor.
That's that overreach, Joel. And look, all of us said, Heidi, you were there. We did need immigration reform. Shouldn't take 7 years to have an adjudication hearing over asylum. Make that 90 days. That's what Biden proposed. Put the agents there that you need it. Make sure there's a pathway to citizenship, all of those things. But that's not what they're doing. I see advertisements, $50,000 signing bonus, pay off your student loans, come join ICE. Do that for our teachers. Do that for police officers in Minneapolis. Do that for nurses. But now we've got a budget where Kristi Noem has a private jet where she can come visit a friend and then hold some weird press conference on the side to justify why she's in Minneapolis when we're not having any issues. This is a grift at the highest level. And I think if you're a hardcore old school conservative, the critiques against Democrats of, you're not paying attention to spending, you're overreaching into our personal lives, you are not allowing local control. We are now much closer to their political ideology than what this White House is. And so I think people just need to come true on this. And I don't know. I don't get in people's grill about their religion. You don't need me as a governor to give you a sermon, but I should live one. And I think these folks are certainly not living a sermon, and they didn't spend a lot of time trying to give us one. But there's nothing I saw in Matthew 25 that told us, well, I'm going to keep these fishes because it'll make you lazy if I give these loaves and fishes to you. No, nothing like that. So look, I think you're right. We need to figure out how to govern. I'm deeply concerned with long-term implications of what it's doing to our society. But I'll have to tell you, I'm super encouraged. A lot of young people getting engaged again, not disengaged, which I think would be understandable. And I think, the No Kings rally, people are busy, but you could still put millions of people on the streets just asking for the president to follow the Constitution, to work with us on things that we need to get done.
I've got 2 more questions, and I'll let Heidi close this out, Governor. The first one you won't answer, and the second one you will. Are you ready?
All right.
The first one is, and I'm not doing my job if I don't ask you this, are you going to or thinking about running for president?
I am not. I am all committed to whoever we have out there to win that. I am committed to being governor of Minnesota, and I'm going to do that to the best of my ability.
Okay, the second one, did the Vikings find their quarterback with J.J. McCarthy?
Yes.
Okay.
I've been out there, Joel. JJ's it. It's
I just want to tell you one more thing before I hand the ball off to Heidi.
The Super Bowl
for the
now.
Packers.
Don't you know that?
You take it from there, Governor.
Thanks, Joel. Just thanks. Why we did not have a good weekend, us Packers fans. I tell you.
Son of a gun. That just hurts.
Well, Kraft from South Dakota. In fact, my husband, who's a family physician, went through residency with his cousin.
I hope he's okay.
That's who Darwin fishes with up in Alaska. And so they're great family, and that's tragedy, and hopefully he'll be able to come back next year, but it sounds like he tore his ACL.
Yeah, that's what they said.
Anyway, what I would say, Governor, is that we need to keep talking, and we need to keep talking common sense in rural America. We need to keep educating people in our party. David Axelrod says it best: when Democrats or when liberals approach rural America, they approach as missionaries and not neighbors and friends.
Yeah, perfect.
Isn't it? I mean, it's like, look what I've done for you. And you're like, really?
Yeah.
That's the persuasion argument?
No, I totally agree. This one's hard for me, Heidi. I think both of you it is too, because I consider myself of that. I watch everybody try and be from rural or try and be that everyday guy. I know in my heart who I am, and I watched them spend $1 billion, to try and tell people that's not who I am, or to tell them to vote for the billionaire, not the guy who brags about not buying stock. I'm not bragging about that. We just, middle America, we have a pension, and that's a good thing. So I agree with you, and I don't think we can give up on this, and I don't think you can belittle your neighbors. I never think it's a good idea to tell somebody they're stupid and then you want them to vote for you. I think it is. I've had this happen to me. People lied to you and you were misled, or you might have got this wrong, or the situation changed. Give folks, the way out, because again, I keep telling people this. This is not some theoretical group of people. These are literally my relatives and my friends. These are the people that we know and grew up with. And I still have great hope that they believe in this democracy. They believe in decency. They believe in kindness. They do expect you to work hard. They do expect you to be honest about things. That's what really gets me. This guy does none of those things. And his family does none of those things. And I think that's maybe the way we get folks back.
Yeah. Well, and then he begs for awards, you know.
What
I mean,
is it with
think
that?
about the
I
rural
think that's what
America
people-
ethic. The cream rises to the top. You don't need to brag. Eventually, you're going to get recognition. He's out bragging about all these countries who know that all they have to do is nominate him for a Nobel, and then he's going to, give him some great trade deal.
You are so right. Funny enough, many months ago, I said this about Canada. I said, look, this guy's easy to read. Canada should make up an award and say, Donald Trump won the world's greatest trade war. Here's a trophy. And then just go back to the way it was.
A crown.
Well,
Yeah,
Japan
that's
did
right.
that, you guys. I mean, Japan was smart. They did that.
That's what Apple did.
They just
Give
can't
him a
find
lot.
anybody to dance as bad as he does. That's the key.
Well, look, you guys are doing the work. I'm glad you're out there. You're getting
Yeah.
voices on, hopefully, that are there. I'm grateful to it. I think about how different it would be, because I said I see you two as kind of the archetype of what I see in rural America: hardworking folks who care about their neighbors, raise a little hell when it's necessary, and be pretty independent, but understand your neighbors might be down on their luck. That's who we were. I mean, that might be a little towards center on some people's radar, but I also think it's a pretty good spot where we end up helping folks. So I'm glad you're out here making the case.
Well, continue to pay attention. And Governor, thank you so much for joining us on the Hot Dish. You've breath of fresh air. Good luck on your reelection bid. And, go Packers.
Oh, thank you, guys.
Thank you, Governor. Talk
Good
to you
to see
soon.
you both.
Yeah.
Fantastic. We'll talk soon.
Well, Joel, I guess all the problems of rural America are solved since he met with the premier or the president of China, Xi Jinping. So are people happy now? People calling you? People happy out there?
I think in farm country, people are in that wait and see mode. They just got done with harvest. There's still a little bit of corn out there for them to get after. But, they're still in a wait and see mode in large part because, while some of them are not ranchers, the ranchers are their friends, and some of them are ranchers and they're ticked off. And so while they might see some improvement in soybeans, they know it's less than what they would have sold. And they know that cattle prices are down because of what he said, Heidi. And so I don't think they're doing the kumbaya yet here.
So I think a lot of people are thinking, well, I guess now, that everybody's happy, or they've declared victory against China, that we don't need any kind of trade support for agriculture and for rural America.
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? If they're going to celebrate, then the big question comes along saying, do they need some level of emergency payment? And if you look at the price for soybeans, it's not good. It's not good. The costs have gone up because of these tariffs. Fertilizer has gone up. Equipment has gone up. I know guys that ordered equipment that had to back off on buying that equipment. And so if soybeans are at or lower than what the prices were last year, it's not good, Heidi. You know that. You grew up here.
Well, and it's interesting because you can say, well, because the inputs have gone up because of tariffs, then farmers are entitled. But Bank of America came out with a study today, Joel, that basically says 50 to 70% of the cost of tariffs are being borne by consumers. No surprise there. I thought if I were going to run, I would run on, I'll reduce the cost of a cup of your coffee, because it'd be pretty easy to do. All you'd have to do is quit tariffing coffee. But people know that their grocery prices have gone up. They know that their cost of living has gone up. And they're getting hit with outrageous, especially if they're small business people, if they're small farmers, or if they're farmers that rely on the exchange, they're getting hit with huge healthcare premium increases.
And that big slap in the face is here. They're already seeing that. I talked to one individual who spoke to his accountant. The accountant said, get ready. You got a lot of bad news coming. And a lot of even the smaller farmers have employees, they have farm help, and those farm helpers, they have to provide insurance too. If they don't, they're off building bobcats where I live. They're in desperate need of workers as well. And so if they don't get health insurance, they're gone. And so they don't have any choice but to pay for these increases. What they're quietly doing is they're quietly sitting there hoping that the Democrats win while they go to the VFW club and don't admit that they're actually cheering for Democrats. And so I don't know, Heidi, this stuff is serious here in farm country.
Well, it's serious all across the country. Prices are up. The working folks are hurting, and Trump keeps saying it's the best economy since the history of the world, which is what I think he said to CBS over the weekend. BS is probably the operative initials in all of that. But so when you look at kind of where these farmers are right now, or where middle America, where working people are, they aren't seeing things any better. And guess what? They're saying that when people poll them. But when they say, well, what about the Democrats? They are not happy with Democrats either.
Yeah, everybody's saying that, and I get it. Polls are polls, and if we're going to believe the ones that we like, then we got to believe the ones we don't like. And so, yeah, Democrats nationally aren't that popular, but that isn't the case of how you poll, in my opinion. You poll the individual races, and so you can use a brand. Because everybody's got that other idea of the brand. But I remember when you ran for the United States Senate and won, Democrats weren't all that popular then. And yet you were. And so let's just take a step back, look at some of those races. I mean, we've got some evidence of that from yesterday. But the truth of the matter is this. The individual Democrat that makes their case, that goes about and says, look, I'm a Democrat, but here's what I believe. If they're talking to their audience is connecting with them right now. And that's what got these guys a little bit nervous.
Yeah. Well, Jamie Harrison, I think, recently said something that really resonated with me. He said, we want to win their votes, but it's more important to win their trust. And so the question is, are we winning the trust of the voters? Do the voters trust the Democratic Party to advance their interest? And, hardcore people always say, oh, you aren't going to change some people's minds. I get that. About a third of the people, they're going to be with this president. They're going to be with the Republican Party no matter what. But I think that the other, half of those voters are gettable with the right kinds of policies and message. And I'm not sure that we're there yet as Democrats.
Okay, I'm going to add one other thing, right? While I disagree with what John Thune is doing, and I think he's forgetting where he's from, these farmers do know where he's from, and they do know where Chuck Schumer is from. And they like the fact that a rural individual is a leader in one of the most powerful positions out there. So that matters too. And when you look at the leadership issues when it comes to all of this, they don't see a lot of rural leaders, Heidi.
No, not a lot of rural leaders that have a D behind their name.
Mm-hmm. Right. That was my point.
Right. But the other thing is they also are seeing that these so-called rural leaders are pledging fealty to Donald Trump and not to rural America. And so when does that set in?
Well, and John Thune should know that all these people's health insurance premiums is about to go through the roof. And lost in all of that is, I hope you don't do this because you're my sister and I want you to be with me playing pinochle again soon. Don't hold your breath until Donald Trump rolls out his plan, because they still don't have a plan when it comes to healthcare. They still don't have
They have a
plan.
concept, Joel. Come on. They're working on a concept.
Well, trust me, I said that when I was refereeing college football. We just have a concept of the rules. We just have a concept. We don't an interpretation. We don't really know all the rules. And yeah, I know how that sells. It's selling now, but when those premiums hit, which they're hitting, the Democrats are on the right side of this issue.
Well, they are, but the question is, if this gets fixed for a couple years, do they say, "See, it got fixed, everything's fine. I can go back to vote the voting pattern that I was voting, and just expect that I'm going to get, that my hurt is going to be heard."
Yeah, well, if they don't gain any political, if they don't get any political benefit out of the fight they just picked, that's on the Democrats. That's
Yeah, I
on their
agree.
messaging. That's on them to go out and make the case of what they did. You spoke at a recent function in a rural state, and that room was packed. In fact, it was standing room only, and it wasn't a small room. And
Mm-mm.
so there are individuals out there who have had it, and they've had it to the brim. And so maybe, and I stress the word maybe there's some folks out there that are willing to get off the couch and work and make the case, Hyde.
Well, my message was simple, though. You can't just be against Trump. I mean, you got to convince people in North Dakota who voted for Trump that they should try something different. And they don't like being told that they were duped. I know that, a good friend of mine says, well, you should use the word you were betrayed. I don't think that sells. I think what you got to say is, look, we understand why you voted the way you did, but it hasn't worked out the way you had hoped. So don't keep doing the same thing over and over again. Try something different. And this is a different set of ideas and a different set of leaders. And, it can't be about identity politics, because even the people that they think they're appealing to in identity politics are sick of it. They want to know how their family and how how their lives are going to be better under a different model of leadership. And that's up to the Democratic Party to talk about.
Yeah, well, I'm going to add one more thing about messaging when it comes to the Democratic Party. And that's why the hot dish is so important, because of this. I do a talk show. That's what I do now. And I have done for a long time. It's heard in Manitoba. It's heard in Saskatchewan, huge listening base, Montana, North Dakota, Minnesota, South Dakota, and parts of Iowa. Yeah, I'm bragging, but we're number one. Here's the thing. We have a much easier time getting that higher level Republican on than we do a Democrat on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the truth. Democrats don't get the way that you utilize the tools that you utilize to speak to rural America. Those guys out there getting after the soybeans are listening to either the hot dish, or they're listening to talk radio, or it's coming to them through their dash. It's not coming to them through their TV. And while they might like TV, and they might like putting on that suit and tie, if they don't get what farmers, ranchers, and rural people are listening to, that's on the Democrats, Heidi.
Well, I agree. I mean, one of the things that I told the Biden administration when they came in, the new ag secretary, the new old ag secretary, I guess
Yeah.
we should say, is if I were the ag secretary, I'd get up every morning and I'd make 5 phone calls to rural radio.
Mm-hmm.
But when people get up in the morning and they put on the coffee pot, they put on their radio station and listen to the weather.
Yep.
That's, or,
The
and you
markets.
think, right, the markets, the weather, there's, and I know, Joel, that there are tons of people out there that rely on radio, but yet none of that happened. It was too busy kind of putting your finger on the scale for identity groups and not enough time actually saying, what's the plan to make your life a little easier in agriculture?
Well, and not to blow smoke up you, anybody who's a frequent listener of the hot dish knows that I'm not a suck up. But the truth is this, that's what one country does.
Yeah.
One country makes sure that people on the East and West Coast, this whole flyover country, know about what's going on in the rural area. And so we'll keep plugging away. I'll keep giving it time, but I'm going back to the messaging. If Democrats can't explain to the nation, to people in the rural areas, exactly who stuck up for them with insurance, then they deserve to lose.
Yeah. Well, I'm really curious to see if we made any strides in rural Virginia, in rural New Jersey. take a look at the Pennsylvania Supreme Court vote. What was the rural vote there, and see if there is some erosion. We aren't going to know that until we dig a little deeper in these election results. But you can't overstate the importance of these elections, but they can be informative in terms of people's mood.
Well, and you've seen me do it. If I was in a national room where I got a chance to talk to high-level, high-profile Democrats like I do Republicans, the first thing I do is ask them questions about guns. Because Democrats don't understand, the people that are speaking to it don't understand how they operate, how they work, what they are, how they look, how they load, all of those things, because there are things that can be done about guns, about making sure that we have good common sense gun laws. But they don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it. And until Democrats understand that, for Democrats here in red states, it's going to be harder and harder to get a message across.
Well, but the other message is you keep saying Democrats are going to take away your guns. Guess what? There's been Democrats in power. Did they take away your guns?
Mm-hmm.
They didn't take away your guns. They have no intention of taking away your guns.
I agree. So, I know that. But my point in this is not whether or not they're going to take away their guns or they're going to pass an amendment, they're going to pass a law, all of this. There are things they can pass that can make guns safer. And that gun owners will agree with. And I don't mean to take all this time up to talk about guns as much as what I'm saying, that's a huge separation, rural to urban, is my point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I will tell you probably the best hunter in the United States Senate's a Democrat.
Yeah.
Knows guns better than anyone, Martin Heinrich. They should follow his lead. He understands. Or when Joe Manchin was there, Joe Manchin is a great shot. I don't know if you ever saw him, but he knew how to hunt. And so you can't just draw with broad brushstrokes. There are people within the Democratic Party who understand, what a gun does and what it could be, what would make sense in terms of gun legislation.
Well, sure I can. I can absolutely paint with a broad stroke because the messaging at the highest level is wrong.
Yeah.
It's wrong. And we can talk about New Mexico. We can talk about West Virginia. We can talk about all of that. The minute that they use common sense to inject common sense into the argument, they lose the room. And so, yes, those guys could shoot. You and I both know a lot of guys can shoot, and you're listening to one right now. The point I'm trying to make is, as Democrats, we need to use our messaging the right way in the rural areas, or at least put the right people in front of them talking, and they're not doing that. That's my point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've got another year before the midterms. I think that the conventional wisdom would tell you that the party in power, which is the Republican Party, is going to lose seats in the House of Representatives. At some point, the speaker is going to have to seat the new Congresswoman from Arizona, and that's going to open up a whole can of worms on the Jeffrey Epstein file, as long as all the ones who have signed the discharge petition as Republicans still keep their signature on the discharge position.
I had a great conversation with David Grimm from The Atlantic. He writes for it, and he talked about Project 2025. He's got a book out on it. The project. The point is this: as he spoke to it, he was looking at ways that the Trump administration, who know that if you're just at the ballot box, that you're going to basically try to eliminate the chance for Democrats to win during the midterm. It begins with making sure that you can argue that, oh man, these elections are all rigged and fake news is helping rig it. You and I both know who Marge Getke is. You and I both know who Jaretta Lingen is. They volunteered their time and made about $20 the whole day to sit in those polling places and be election judges. They can't be more honest than those people I just described are. And so, that argument has to be made. But Graham made a great point in The Atlantic, and it shows exactly what you said. Trump knows he's in trouble, but he's already thinking of a way to get around it.
Well, I mean, yeah, after what happened last night in California, level the playing field, but it's kind of a race to the bottom on gerrymandering now.
Yeah. Well, you know what? If somebody punches you in the nose, what are you going to do? You're going to sit there and cry or punch back?
Yeah, well, we know what Gavin Newsom's going to do.
My hero right now. My hero right now. Hyde, it's always good to talk to you, man.
Yeah, hang in there, Joel. More to come, and there'll be a whole year of analyzing what the Democrats should be saying because I think Jamie Harrison has it right. Not enough to win the vote. You got to win the trust.
I agree. And, all of this stuff just makes it brutal, absolutely terrible to do talk radio.
Yeah, I bet. No, controversy's not good for talk
No,
radio, is
never
it?
really
No.
works. It never
No.
gets those phone lines going.
Thank you for joining us today on The Hot Dish, brought to you by the One Country Project, which is trying to make sure that the voices of all of us are heard in Washington, D.C.
Learn more at onecountryproject.org. That's onecountryproject.org. We'll be back next week with more comfort food for rural America.
Topica.